Admit it, guys, when you watch this movie, you had a big crush on Jenny. Because I do. The Muppets Take Manhattan is directed by Frank Oz and written by Tom Patchett and Jay Tarses. Again, this movie kind of stars Jim Henson and Frank Oz as the main puppeteers, as well as Juliana Donald, who plays like the main human character here, Jenny. Now, the Muppets Take Manhattan sees Kermit and the gang traveling to New York because they want to put up this musical they made on Broadway. But when they get there, they realize that that's not as easy as it sounds. And literally speaking, like unemployment happens, and they just kind of have to figure out how to kind of live in New York City, looking for work and stuff. And at the same time, Kermit's still not letting go of his dream of putting up his play on Broadway. Now, compared to the Great Muppet Caper, the Muppets Take Manhattan really is a step up this time, but it really does feel like Damage Control, you know? It's definitely regained its footing. I can say it's more Muppets than the second one was, but it really does play it really, really safe. It's also a much smaller film, whereas the Great Muppet Caper had like large sets and all. This one usually takes place in like small interiors and stuff. It really does feel more like a TV show kind of thing, but not necessarily in a bad way. But you know what? The Muppets Take Manhattan does end up being a solid film despite its safety. First of all, in terms of the puppetry used here, it's not as grand as the last movie. Like, you don't get huge shots, elaborate, setups with the Muppets doing crazy things. But here, there really is such nuance in just the way they move and stuff. Like, I really think they did the less is more approach, where they didn't necessarily make the Muppets do crazy things, but just in the ways they moved made them actually feel like real characters even more now. And I realize when I say that doesn't really make as much of an impact as when you see it. So you really have to see it and just see how well these characters move. Like I said, in terms of production design, this movie is mostly interiors, and even if that is a safe thing, it is done very well. You get a good sense of place in this movie. There's also lots of fun with costumes because Jenny, the human character here, she kind of wants to be a fashion designer. So at certain points in the movie, she helps Kermit, with some disguises. And these are short scenes, but they're really fun, and it really shows kind of like the filmmakers just having fun with just putting their Muppets in different costumes and stuff. They don't just stick to naked green Kermit. Good news though with the Muppets Take Manhattan, the music is back, yes, but the music isn't as legendary. There's not as much of it again, but the music they do have retains that wit, that charm, the universality. It really feels like these songs can be taken as standalone songs. They don't feel like they're songs in the context of a Muppet movie, like the second one, I think. There are again a few songs worthy of note, and I will read them here. Number one is "Together Again," which is a very, very catchy song. "You Can't Take No for an Answer" by Dr. Teeth is great. "Saying Goodbye," though, has to be the best song here because it's actually extremely emotional, which is very surprising. I mean, "Rainbow Connection" is very emotional also, but it's very emotional in the sense that, like, "Imagine" by John Lennon is emotional. It's very, it's very high concept actually. But "Saying Goodbye" really is just this old school, very unashamedly sentimental song, and it's really, really nice because it's sung by everybody. And even if the ending of this movie kind of has a bit too much music, wow, I can't believe I said that, but there's a bit too much music, the music overall is a very welcome return. Now, what really, really surprised me in this movie, though, is the characters because they are so well written. It's unbelievable. All these Muppet characters, they have such real and believable reactions to things, like emotional reactions. Like, prime example is Miss Piggy because again, as I've mentioned before, I'm not a huge fan of Miss Piggy, but here I actually did like her character because could believe what she was going through because she feels jealous of this kind of friendship that develops between Jenny and Kermit. And it's funny, but at the same time, like I can like really understand her. This movie is also arguably very Kermit centric, but that's okay because I think the Muppets has always been Kermit centric. But what I like so much is that this isn't Kermit centric, as in it's just like Kermit's the star of the show. He goes through some emotions here. Like, he gets mad, he gets really, really sad about certain things, about letting his friends down again, and just that emotional arc is really, really fun to watch. And when the other Muppets think that he's mad, like, they react also in very believable ways, and it's just very impressive. I really appreciated also how the human characters are quite deep also, mainly Jenny, because she's pretty much the only human character here who gets like a considerable amount of screen time, and she's handled very well in my opinion. She bounces off Kermit well, and she actually does have a good part to play in this movie. And she's attractive in that old, 80s way. I don't know. The humor in The Muppets Take Manhattan is definitely more grounded. There are more mature jokes also, which I was surprised to see. But really, the dialogue is just so real also because this movie does, in fact, deal with unemployment and trying to make ends meet in like a city like New York. And I like how they don't romanticize New York like that. They really show that it's not really dog eat dog, but you really have to just work so hard to at least get a little money. Also, before I forget, I gotta mention the Muppet Babies because this is the first time the Muppet Babies appear. They only appear for like one scene, and it's the cutest thing ever. Like, how can you not find that cute? Another thing I was very impressed by in this movie was Frank Oz's direction because it is very, very personal. Because among the three Muppet movies so far at this point in time, this is the one that is so Muppet centric. Like, there's more human characters here, I think, than the first one, but the focus really is on the Muppets. There's all the focus is always on them in every scene. The cameos also I think were utilized very well. You know, they're not just shoehorned into there. The cameos are actually very funny. But really, overall, Frank Oz's direction really makes it very emotional, surprisingly, for a story about these Muppets. However, The Muppets Take Manhattan isn't perfect. Again, I do have problems with it. It's definitely not as good as the first one. Uh, One problem I have with it is that it does have that whole sketch comedy kind of style again, and that inevitably makes things feel kind of slow because it doesn't necessarily feel like they're following a very strict plot. So sometimes they just go into like these little sketches, and it does feel kind of slow. Also, the plot itself doesn't really allow for lots of things to happen because it's very, very simple, and it's not really there's nothing at stake necessarily. It's just people trying to do a certain thing. It's not like they're on time limit or anything like that. Well, for a certain part of the movie that is. I mean, but yeah, I can't spoil anything. One of my bigger problems though is the ending of this movie because I'm not really a fan of it. It makes me dislike Miss Piggy again. I'm sorry, but really the ending just feels very abrupt. I'd like to see more, tied loose ends. And again, I do put lots of importance on the ending of a movie because that is the payoff. That's what we wait for. The payoff here was just kind of like, oh, it's over. So in the end, The Muppets Take Manhattan is still a pretty good movie. It's very solid. And I think it is like the best way to introduce people to the Muppets if they're not really sold on the whole singing and dancing thing, because this is as grounded as the Muppets are ever gonna get, and it's very, very refreshing. Alright guys, that is my review of The Muppets Take Manhattan. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.